The evening began like any other, crystal chandeliers glowing softly over a crowd of polished laughter and fine wine. Every seat was filled at the Azure table, the city's most exclusive dining spot. Waiters glided between tables with quiet precision, their black uniforms sharp as their posture. But at the entrance, a silence was about to swallow the room whole. "Ma'am, I already told you. We don't have tables for your kind of people tonight." The hostess's voice sliced through the air like cold steel. Dozens of heads turned. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Forks paused mid-air. And in that sudden, heavy stillness stood a woman in a sleek navy dress, her eyes calm but unreadable. Her name was Elena Brooks. The marble floor beneath her shoes. She had chosen it herself 3 years ago when this restaurant was only a blueprint. The chandeliers that threw gold light across the ceiling, approved by her. The playlist drifting through hidden speakers, curated by her. Everything. The furniture, the art, the lighting had passed through her hands. Her vision, her perfectionism, and yet tonight, she stood here as a stranger in her own creation. The hostess, Claire, didn't know that the woman before her wasn't just another guest. She was the reason the restaurant existed. But ignorance has a way of looking like arrogance, and arrogance always wants an audience. "Miss, you need to leave," Claire said, her chin tilted slightly upward. "We have a dress code, and your presence is making our guests uncomfortable." A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Someone coughed. Another whispered. Even the soft jazz seemed to fade, as if the sound itself held its breath. Elena's dark eyes scanned the faces watching her, people she knew all too well. The banker who had personally begged her for an investment at Table 7. The councilman who'd voted to grant tax breaks to her hospitality company. The judge's wife, whose charity gala she had sponsored 3 years in a row. They were all watching. And soon they would all remember this night for the rest of their lives. Inside her purse rested a small platinum key fob, the master key to everything here. One press could end this humiliation instantly, but Elna didn't reach for it. Not yet, because revenge, when served too soon, loses its flavor. And justice. Justice needs an audience, 5 minutes. That's all it would take to change everything. The manager arrived next, a man in his 40s named Richard Hale, wiping his hands on a towel as if he'd just finished solving more important problems than this one. "Problem here, Claire?" he asked, already annoyed, before the hostess could answer. His eyes landed on Elena. His expression tightened, authority without empathy, confidence without reason. "Ma'am," he said briskly, "this is a private establishment. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Elena's voice came quiet but steady. "I'd like to speak with your general manager." "That's me," Richard replied, puffing his chest slightly. "And I'm telling you to go." He crossed his arms, standing tall like a man used to being obeyed. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that he had just walked into the most catastrophic 5 minutes of his professional life. At Table 7, the banker set down his wine glass, eyes wide. He knew that look in Elena's face, the stillness before something unstoppable, the calm before a reckoning. Claire shifted uncomfortably. The crowd watched like spectators at a trial. Even the air seemed thicker, electric, waiting. Elena's fingers brushed against the cool metal inside her purse. The key fob, the business card. 2 objects that could shatter this illusion of control in seconds. But patience, she reminded herself, is what separates power from impulse. Richard frowned. "I'll call security if I have to." "You should," Elena said softly. "They might want to witness this too." At that moment, the first real seed of fear flickered behind his eyes. "Tony," Richard barked into his radio. "Front desk, now." Seconds later, Tony Ruiz appeared, a broad-shouldered man with eyes that had seen too much. Former military, now security. His presence carried quiet authority, not aggression. "Evening, ma'am," he said carefully. "Let's not make this difficult." Elena studied him closely. She saw something the others didn't have. Integrity. The quiet kind that doesn't need to shout. "I understand," she said gently. "But before I go, I have one question." Richard rolled his eyes. "Make it quick." Elena stepped forward, her tone even but sharp as glass. "Richard Hale, employee ID 5236, hired 18 months ago. Correct?" The room froze. Claire's face drained of color. How do you know that?" she whispered. "And Claire Bennett," Elena continued. "Part-time hostess. State University. Also hired 18 months ago through the campus recruiting program. Now even Tony looked uneasy. "Ma'am, who are you?" Elena smiled faintly. "I'm someone who believes in second chances," she said. But not in second chances for disrespect. The tension in the air was unbearable now. Every heartbeat a drum. The entire restaurant felt suspended between silence and revelation. Because in less than 3 minutes, every person in that room was about to learn who really held the keys to this empire. Tony's radio crackled softly, but no one moved. Every eye in the restaurant stayed locked on the woman standing near the entrance. Elena's calmness made everyone uneasy. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. She simply stood there like a storm gathering strength. Richard cleared his throat, forcing a laugh that sounded too thin. "Ma'am, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm the person who built this place from the ground up," Elena said. Her voice stayed low, but the weight behind it could have broken stone. "And in about 2 minutes, you're going to understand exactly what that means." A few guests exchanged looks, whispering. The banker at table 7 raised his phone subtly, recording. He sensed what everyone else did. The air was about to crack open. "Security!" Richard barked again, his confidence starting to crumble. "Escort her out." Tony didn't move. He just stared at Elena, his jaw tightening. Something in her eyes told him this wasn't a mistake. "It was a test, Tony," she said, her voice soft now. "How long have you worked here?" He blinked. A year and a half. Veteran program hire?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." "Your daughter," Elena continued, "is Sophia Ruiz. She's a sophomore at Pacific State studying pre-med on a full scholarship." Tony froze. "How do you know that?" "Because I approved her scholarship personally," Elena replied. "Through the Employee Family Education Fund." The silence that followed felt alive. Richard's mouth opened, then closed. What is going on here?" Elena turned to him, finally pulling the platinum key fob from her purse. The metallic shine reflected the chandelier light like a blade. "This," she said, "opens the executive office upstairs, the one you've never been in. Because it belongs to me." A collective gasp rippled through the dining room. The judge's wife whispered something to her husband. The councilman lowered his fork and muttered, "Oh my God." "Elena Brooks," she said clearly, so there could be no misunderstanding. "Founder and chief executive officer of Brooks Hospitality Group, which means this restaurant and the 12 others just like it belong to me." Claire stepped backward, her face white as porcelain. I didn't know. You didn't care to know." Elena interrupted, her words sharp but steady. "You saw my skin, my dress, my silence, and you assumed I didn't belong." Richard's voice trembled. "Ms. Brooks, please, I swear, you called security on your CEO," Elena said. "And you did it in front of 37 paying guests." Phones were recording openly now. The atmosphere had changed from gossip to awe. Everyone wanted to witness what came next. "Marcus," Elena said into her phone, speaking clearly for all to hear. A man's voice answered instantly. "Yes, Ms. Brooks. Pull the employee files for Richard Hale, Claire Bennett, and Tony Ruiz," Elena said. "I want their training and disciplinary records." Richard's knees went weak. Wait, you can't do this here." "Oh, I can," she replied calmly. "You just did this to me here." Tony looked down, ashamed. "Ma'am, I didn't mean any disrespect. I was following orders." Elena nodded softly. "And you did it with decency even when you were misled." "That matters, Tony." Marcus's voice came through the speaker again, crisp and merciless. "Files retrieved, Miss Brooks, reading now." The crowd listened like a congregation awaiting judgment. "Richard Hale," Marcus said. "Anti-discrimination training never completed. 3 written warnings for inappropriate comments to female staff. 2 verified customer complaints in the last 6 months." Gasps rippled through the tables. The banker whispered, "It's over for him." "Claire Bennett," Marcus continued. "Training failed twice. On probation for customer seating discrimination earlier this year." Claire sank into the nearest chair, tears forming in her eyes. Elena's expression didn't change. She was calm, composed, terrifying in her control. "And Tony?" "Tony Ruiz," Marcus read. "Training completed with top marks. 0 complaints. Commended twice for professionalism and courtesy." Elena nodded once. "Thank you, Marcus." Tony looked at her uncertainly. "Ma'am, what do you want me to do?" "Return to your post," she said gently. "You did your job with integrity." You are not the problem here. He hesitated, saluted softly, and walked away. The respect in his eyes said more than words ever could. Elena turned back to Richard and Claire. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound left. So here's what we have, she said slowly. A manager who ignored required training. A hostess who failed it twice. Both of you, representing a company that stands for equality, and both of you discriminated against your own CEO. Richard's voice cracked. Please, Ms. Brooks, my son, he's sick. His medical bills, Elena's tone stayed even. Yes, the same bills our company's hardship fund paid for. You see the irony, Richard? He broke. Completely. Tears welled up as he realized what she meant. I wasn't just your boss, she said softly. I was the person saving your son's life. The crowd was silent. No one dared even breathe. Elena lifted her phone again. Marcus, connect me to the board. A few seconds later, another voice joined. This is Chairwoman Diane Collins. We're all on the line. Good, Elena said. Because tonight we're addressing a code red discrimination incident in our flagship location. I'm invoking Operation Renewal. Richard blinked, confused. Operation what? The voice on the speaker replied without hesitation. You have full authorization, Ms. Brooks. Elena took a deep breath. Then I want every employee in this building, every single one, assembled in the main dining area immediately. The command hit like thunder. Servers froze. Bartenders looked up. From the kitchen came the clatter of plates. Ma'am, Richard whispered, panic in his eyes. You can't. I will, she said. And you're going to witness what accountability looks like. One by one, the staff began to emerge. Line cooks, servers, bartenders, dishwashers. The dining room filled with nervous eyes and whispered fear. Elena stood in the center, surrounded by the people who had built her dream and nearly destroyed it in one night. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steady, measured, and unforgettable. I am Elena Brooks, she said, your CEO. Tonight I walked into my own restaurant and was refused service because of who I am. But this isn't just about me. It's about every customer who's ever felt unwelcome in a place they helped build with their trust and their money. And tonight that ends. The crowd of diners erupted in hushed murmurs. Phones were lifted again. The moment had become history in motion. Elena opened a folder she had brought with her, thick with printed pages. 23 documented discrimination complaints, ignored, dismissed, buried, until tonight. The room fell into pure silence once more. This is where we start. Rebuilding, she said, and that was only the beginning. No one spoke as Elena's words sank in. The marble floor seemed to echo with a weight that went beyond sound. Staff shifted uneasily, their faces tight with dread. Some avoided her eyes, others stared as though trying to read their fate. Marcus, Elena said into her phone, I want the customer service and satisfaction metrics for the last 6 months read aloud. Yes, Ms. Brooks. One moment. As the quiet stretched, you could almost hear hearts beating. The chandelier lights shimmered over faces pale with tension. Guests at nearby tables held their phones higher, streaming the moment live. Marcus's voice returned, steady but grave. Customer satisfaction scores have dropped 26% in the last half year. Complaints about staff attitude have doubled. We've lost nearly $300,000 in repeat business. A soft gasp escaped someone near the bar. Elena didn't flinch. And how many of those complaints mentioned discrimination? 68%, Marcus replied. Every whisper in the room died. Elena looked around slowly, letting the silence work. 68%, she repeated. That means most of the people who walked out of here unhappy didn't complain about the food. They complained about you. A busser in the back rubbed his hands together nervously. A server's lip trembled. Richard looked like he was about to collapse. Let's make one thing clear, Elena continued. This isn't about public humiliation. It's about accountability. The only thing more dangerous than discrimination is pretending it doesn't exist. She lifted a paper from her folder, her eyes scanning the lines. Sarah Morgan, server. March 18th. Refused to seat a couple because she assumed they couldn't afford to dine here. Complaint filed. No disciplinary action taken. Gasps filled the room again. A young woman near the back covered her face, sobbing quietly. Michael Thompson, bartender, April the 2nd, told a family the bar was closing. Continued to serve other customers for another hour. Complaint ignored. Elena looked up from the page, her tone calm but razor sharp. Do you know what ignoring these does to a business? It kills it from the inside. It makes rot look like routine. Richard stepped forward shakily. Ms. Brooks, please, can we handle this privately? You're tearing the place apart. I'm not tearing it apart, she said softly. I'm cleaning it. A few of the guests nodded, their faces reflecting admiration more than shock. Even those recording had stopped pretending it was just content. This was something bigger. The phone speaker crackled. Ms. Brooks, this is Chairwoman Collins again. We're still on the line. Do you want to proceed with your recommendation? Yes, Elena said. But before I do, I want everyone here to understand what's at stake. She turned toward her staff. Under federal law, verified discrimination incidents can cost a company up to $300,000 each. Multiply that by 24 complaints and we're staring at over $7 million in potential liability. Murmurs erupted across the dining room. The staff exchanged horrified looks. The judge's wife let out a low whistle. And that's just money, Elena added. What it really costs is trust. The kind you can't buy back. Richard's voice shook. I made mistakes, but please, my family, you should have thought of that before your arrogance became policy, she said. Our company paid your son's hospital bills, Richard, and you repaid us by humiliating your employer in front of strangers. His legs buckled. He caught the edge of a chair to steady himself. Tears fell freely now. Elena looked to Claire. And you, she said quietly. Twice you failed the training designed to protect people like me, and people like you. You could have learned, but you chose to judge instead. Claire's hands covered her face as she broke down completely. Elena turned back to Marcus. Read the company policy on discrimination incidents. Marcus didn't hesitate. Immediate suspension pending investigation. If confirmed, termination is mandatory under Section 12(3). Then apply it, Elena said simply. Richard collapsed into a chair, whispering to himself. Claire sobbed uncontrollably. Elena didn't look away. Richard Hale, Claire Bennett, you are both terminated effective immediately. Your severance will be processed as required by law. Your non-disclosure agreements are void. You no longer represent this company. The room erupted in hushed murmurs. Guests exchanged glances, some in disbelief, some in admiration. Elena continued, her tone unwavering. Tony Ruiz, you are promoted to head of security. Effective tonight, Tony froze mid-step. Ma'am! I don't know what to say. Say you'll make sure this never happens again, Elena said. He straightened, his voice solid now. Yes, ma'am. The crowd began to applaud softly. Even a few employees joined in, the sound fragile but sincere. Elena raised her hand. Quiet, please. We're not done. She turned to the phone again. Marcus, what's the total number of employees at this location? 47. Then all 47 will complete emergency anti-bias training starting tomorrow morning. Failure to pass means immediate termination. And I want every single one of them, every one, to sign a personal commitment to uphold equality in this workplace. Yes, Ms. Brooks, Marcus replied. And Marcus, she added, schedule a press briefing in 1 hour. We're not hiding this. We're owning it. The board chair's voice returned, low but certain. You have full backing, Elena. This goes public tonight. Elena nodded, her expression unreadable. Then let the world see what real accountability looks like. Through the tall windows, camera flashes began popping from the street outside. Reporters had already arrived, drawn by the social media storm unfolding in real time. Elena took one last look at her trembling staff, her pale ex-manager, her audience of stunned guests. This restaurant was built to make people feel welcome, she said, and somehow it became a place that made people feel small. That changes now. She looked at Richard and Claire one final time. I hope you both learn from this. Because if you don't, life will teach you harder than I ever could. Then she turned to the rest of her staff. Everyone else, decide right now if you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem. If you stay, you'll rebuild with me. If you go, you'll go with your head high. But you'll go knowing you ran from change. No one moved. The silence was complete. And in that silence, for the first time all night, respect replaced fear. Elena took a breath and looked toward the entrance where the first camera crew was already stepping inside. This isn't over, she said quietly. This is just where it starts. The front doors opened and flashes of light streaked across the marble floor. Reporters were spilling in, their cameras lifted, microphones ready. No one could have scripted what came next, Elena didn't hide. She didn't call her PR team. She simply stepped forward into the brightness, the air outside thick with curiosity and heat. Her calm voice carried through the crowd. You're all welcome to record. What's happening tonight is accountability in real time. A young reporter pushed through the group. Ms. Brooks, is it true you were refused service at your own restaurant? Elena met her gaze steadily. Yes, I was told there were no tables for my kind of people. But this isn't about one insult. It's about a pattern that stops here and now. The murmurs rose like a tide. Behind her, the glass doors framed the entire staff standing awkwardly under the chandelier light, some with guilt, others with fear, a few with quiet determination. Another reporter shouted, Are you firing everyone involved? I'm rebuilding the system that allowed it to happen, Elena answered.
Firing is easy.
Changing people is harder, but that's where the real work begins. Phones everywhere streamed her words. Within minutes, clips were already circling the internet. The hashtag #Brooks Standard began to appear on screens. Elena turned back toward the dining room where her employees waited. Everyone, please listen. In 48 hours, this restaurant will reopen. Not just as a business, but as a symbol of what accountability can look like. The staff exchanged uncertain looks. No one knew what to expect. In the coming weeks, she continued, we'll be implementing what I'm calling the Brooks Standard, a new framework for equality in the hospitality industry. Her assistant, Marcus, now joined the press call through the phone speaker, reading the details she'd dictated minutes earlier. Phase 1, he said. All customer interactions will be monitored through audio review systems. If any language of bias or disrespect is detected, management will be alerted instantly. A waiter gasped. That means every conversation? Yes, Elena said. Because prevention matters more than excuses. If something's wrong, we fix it before it hurts anyone. Phase 2, Marcus continued. Bias training will no longer be annual. It will be monthly. Completion will directly affect raises and promotions. The staff murmured among themselves. For some, it sounded strict. For others, it sounded like hope. Elena stepped closer to them. If you fail the training, you lose your eligibility for review. Equality isn't optional here. It's required. Phase 3, Marcus said. Customer feedback will go directly to headquarters, bypassing local management. Every complaint launches a third-party investigation. Reporters were scribbling furiously. One asked, Ms. Brooks, what will that cost your company? About $2.5 million a year, she replied. But we were already losing more than that in reputation and trust. Prevention is cheaper than damage control. The crowd reacted with a mix of admiration and disbelief. A woman near the front said under her breath, She's turning this disaster into history. Elena wasn't done. We'll also create a $2 million customer equity fund managed by an independent board. That board will include civil rights lawyers, hospitality experts, and community leaders. Anyone who experiences discrimination in one of our restaurants will be compensated immediately. No lawyers, no NDAs, just justice. One of the waitresses wiped her eyes. That's incredible, she whispered. Elena nodded slowly. It's necessary, because dignity should never depend on who's serving you. Another reporter shouted, Are you making this standard public? Yes, she said. Every restaurant in America can have it. We're not keeping it secret. We're making it open source. Use it, improve it. Do better with it. Her phone buzzed. Marcus's voice came through again. We just received a call from the National Restaurant Alliance. They want to meet tomorrow about adopting your program. Elena smiled faintly. Tell them they don't need my permission. They just need courage. Behind her, Tony stepped forward, his voice steady now. Ma'am, what about us, the staff who want to make this right? Elena looked at him with the quiet strength that had guided her all night. Then you'll be the example. You'll rebuild this place with me. Every mistake we've made becomes a lesson. Every lesson becomes a promise. The staff nodded slowly. The fear in their faces began to fade, replaced by something new. Resolve. From outside, a reporter called. Ms. Brooks, what's your message to other business owners watching this? She turned toward the cameras. Stop waiting for lawsuits and headlines. Stop reacting to problems you could prevent. Discrimination isn't just immoral, it's unprofitable. And pretending it's rare doesn't make it less real. The silence that followed was complete. Even the flashes seemed to pause. Elena's eyes scanned the crowd. If we want to build businesses that last, they have to be built on respect. That's not politics. That's survival, someone in the press row clapped once. Then another joined. Within seconds, the room filled with applause, not polite, but full, grateful. Elena lifted her hand again. Quiet, please. This isn't applause-worthy yet. We'll earn that when no one ever has to go through what I did tonight. The reporters fell silent. Her voice softened, but still carried strength. We failed tonight. But failure is a beginning when you face it, and that's exactly what we're doing. Behind her, Tony nodded toward the staff, who now stood in rows, no longer hiding. Some held hands. Others bowed their heads. The air felt lighter, not with relief, but with purpose. Elena turned back to them. Starting now, every receipt will carry my direct email address. If something happens in one of my restaurants, I'll know about it. No excuses, no delays, no cover-ups. The reporter from before asked, "You're making yourself personally accountable to every customer?" "Yes," Elena said. "Because if a CEO can't care about how people are treated, that company doesn't deserve to exist." The line struck through every heart in the room. Phones captured it. The clip would be shared thousands of times before morning, but Elena wasn't thinking about headlines. She was thinking about the people still standing behind her, the ones who had chosen to stay. "Tomorrow," she said, "we start over, together." And for the first time since the night began, the staff broke into applause, not out of fear, but out of faith. By sunrise, the story had already exploded. Every major outlet had picked it up. Headlines filled with her name and phrases like, "The night the CEO fought back," and "The Brooks Standard, a revolution in real time." Elena hadn't slept. She sat in her office overlooking the city, the same skyline she'd once dreamed of conquering, now reflected in the windows of a company she was rebuilding from the inside out. Her phone buzzed nonstop, requests for interviews, partnerships, endorsements. But all she cared about were the reports coming in from her team. Marcus's voice on the speaker was brisk, almost amazed. "We've had calls from 18 restaurant groups across 7 states requesting access to the Brooks Standard materials. Legal teams from 3 national chains are asking for guidance, and the National Restaurant Alliance has requested you as keynote speaker for their conference next quarter." Elena leaned back slowly, her voice quiet. "So they're finally paying attention." "Yes, ma'am. You're changing the rules." She thought back to that night. The marble floor, the silence, the humiliation that turned into purpose. Change had started from something ugly, but that was the point. Change never came dressed in comfort. Within 48 hours, her company's flagship location had reopened. Every employee wore a new badge that read, "Accountability is our policy." The customers who walked in knew they were entering something more than a restaurant. They were entering a promise. Tony, now officially head of security for all Brooks hospitality properties, greeted guests with a quiet dignity that set the tone for the entire space. "Welcome to Brooks," he'd say, smiling softly. "We're glad you're here." When the first news crew returned, the dining room buzzed with a different kind of energy. No fear, no pretense, just a shared determination to do better. Elena stood in the same spot where she'd been denied a table, watching everything run smoothly. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe. Customer satisfaction scores shot up 30% in a week. Employee turnover dropped almost overnight. But what mattered more were the messages she began to receive. A letter from a waitress in Georgia who said, "I finally stood up for a customer who was mistreated because I saw what you did." An email from a retired veteran in Texas who wrote, "Your policy helped my daughter get justice at her job. Thank you for not staying quiet." And a message from a restaurant owner she'd never met. "The Brooks Standard saved my business from collapse. We're not just serving food now. We're serving fairness." Each note reminded her why she'd chosen not to walk away that night. Meanwhile, the ripple grew wider. The largest hotel chains began adopting versions of her framework. Airlines asked to consult her legal team. Even tech companies wanted to learn how her feedback model could prevent harassment and bias online. Within 6 months, what had begun as a scandal had turned into a movement. The Brooks Standard became shorthand for integrity. Richard Hale, the man who had humiliated her, didn't vanish. He took his severance and disappeared for a while. But 3 months later, a letter arrived at Elena's office in his handwriting. It wasn't angry or defensive. It was raw. "Ms. Brooks, I've spent the last few months asking myself how I became the kind of person who could look at someone and see less instead of equal. I lost my job, but I think I might have found my conscience. I'm in counseling now. I'm volunteering at a veterans center. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm trying. Elena read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in a file she labeled Redemption. Claire Bennett's name appeared again, too, this time in a university news article. She had withdrawn from her hospitality program and switched her major to social justice studies. Her essay, Learning Through Consequences, went viral on student forums. It began with the line, "The night I lost my job, I found my humanity." Elena smiled when she read that. Some lessons, she thought, are worth everything they cost. Months passed and success turned sustainable. Reports showed that across all Brooks locations, discrimination complaints had fallen to zero. Customer compliments mentioning respectful service and inclusive staff had quadrupled. Elena's company wasn't just profitable. It had become the model everyone else wanted to follow. Then came the conference. 1,000 industry leaders gathered in a vast ballroom under a banner that read, "Profit Through Prevention, the Brooks Standard in Action." When Elena stepped on stage, the applause lasted longer than she expected. But when it quieted, she spoke plainly. "I'm not here to celebrate," she began. "I'm here to remind us why this started. I was humiliated in my own restaurant. But instead of revenge, I chose responsibility. Because real leadership isn't about being untouchable, it's about being accountable." She looked out over the crowd. Owners, managers, employees, people who had seen their own headlines, their own mistakes. "Discrimination isn't a training issue," she continued. "It's a leadership issue. It ends when leaders decide it ends." For a moment, the entire room was silent. Then they stood and clapped, not politely, but with conviction. By the next morning, news outlets across the country were quoting her speech. Her words became a mantra printed on posters, quoted in business journals, taught in seminars. And as her movement grew, something else happened. The phrase "to pull a Brooks" entered everyday language. It meant facing failure head-on and transforming it into change. In one interview, Elena was asked, "Do you ever regret what happened that night?" She smiled slightly. "Regret? No, that night didn't break me. It built me. Because every generation needs a moment that reminds them what integrity looks like in action." "That was mine," the interviewer pressed. "But was it worth all the pain, the public scrutiny, the chaos?" Elena's answer spread across the internet within hours. Pain fades. Change doesn't. The question isn't whether it hurt, it's whether it mattered. And this mattered. Outside the conference hall, she found Tony waiting. He handed her a folded sheet of paper. "What's this?" she asked. "Updates from the new hires," he said. "They wanted to thank you. We've had more veterans apply in the last 2 weeks than ever before." Elena nodded, her voice soft. "Because you made them feel like they belong," he smiled. "We all belong now." They stood together for a long moment, watching the crowd outside the hotel. Young managers, reporters, students, all talking about equality like it wasn't just an idea but a daily habit. Elena realized then that the story wasn't really hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who decided to do better, but the journey wasn't finished yet. Because the Brooks Standard had started in one restaurant, now it was about to reach the entire world. Months turned into years, and the ripple became a tide no one could stop. Restaurants from New York to Los Angeles proudly displayed plaques reading, "Certified by the Brooks Standard." Hotel chains followed. Airlines began adapting the same system for customer service. Even call centers in other industries were retraining staff using her framework. Elena never set out to become a symbol, but that's what she became. She didn't chase publicity, yet her name ended up in textbooks and documentaries. When Harvard Business School called asking to feature her case study in their ethics curriculum, she didn't hesitate. "Use it," she said. "Let people learn from it. Let it outgrow me." Her office wall soon filled with letters, handwritten, typed, printed from emails. Each one a story of someone who chose integrity when it was hard. A hotel receptionist in Chicago who stopped a manager from profiling guests. A diner owner in Alabama who adopted her training and doubled his loyal customers within months. A small bakery in Paris that hung her quote on their wall in English, "Change begins where silence ends." One afternoon, Marcus entered her office with a quiet smile. "You're going to want to see this," he said, handing her a news report. The headline read, "Hyatt becomes first global chain to adopt Brooks Standard across 900 properties worldwide." Elena stared at it for a long time. 900, she whispered. Marcus nodded. It's happening, Elena. You started a wave that became an ocean. Her phone buzzed again. Another headline. Brooke Standard passes 50 million mentions online. The video of her calm confrontation that night, recorded on phones from every corner of that restaurant, had now reached over 70 million views. Yet the comments under it had changed over time. They weren't just outrage anymore. They were stories of transformation. A user wrote, "Because of this woman, my company changed its policies." Another wrote, "I finally reported my boss and they listened." And one more, "My daughter just got hired by a Brooks restaurant. She says it feels like the safest place she's ever worked." Elena felt something deep inside her, a quiet peace she hadn't allowed herself since that night. Not triumph, not pride, just gratitude. Then came the invitation that surprised her most, a TEDx event titled The Quiet Revolution. She hesitated at first, but eventually she agreed. When she walked on stage months later, the lights were warm, the room silent except for the soft hum of anticipation. She didn't speak right away. She let the quiet breathe, just like she had that night in her restaurant. Then she said, "People always ask if it was worth it." The audience leaned forward. "They want to know if I'm glad I didn't walk away that night," she continued. "They ask if the humiliation, the confrontation, the endless noise afterward were worth the pain." She paused, her voice steady but full of memory. "And my answer is simple. Yes, it was worth every uncomfortable second. Because in the 2 years since that night, over 2,000 documented incidents of discrimination have been prevented in businesses that adopted the Brooks Standard. 2,000 people didn't have to experience what I did, and that's worth everything." The crowd erupted into applause that built like a wave and didn't stop. But Elena raised her hand gently and silence returned. "But this story isn't finished. It's not finished until discrimination in service is so rare that videos like mine are no longer breaking news. They're history lessons. Until that happens, every one of us still has work to do." She looked straight into the camera, her gaze calm but piercing. "You have power. Every customer, every manager, every leader. You can hope discrimination doesn't happen where you work or where you eat. Or you can demand systems that make sure it doesn't. The choice is yours." Her final words became a rallying cry that echoed across screens and hearts alike. The goal isn't to destroy people who discriminate. The goal is to create systems that make discrimination impossible. That's the standard I live by, the standard we should all demand. And it starts with you. When she stepped off the stage, the applause was thunderous, but what mattered more was what came after. Businesses began contacting her foundation daily, asking for guidance. Universities requested partnerships. Advocacy groups used her framework to influence legislation. Months later, Elena returned to the restaurant where everything had begun. The marble floor gleamed. The chandeliers sparkled. The air hummed not with fear, but with warmth. The new general manager, Jennifer Parker, greeted her at the door with a proud smile. "Welcome home, Ms. Brooks," Elena smiled back. "It's not just my home anymore, Jennifer. It's everyone's." Tony appeared beside her, introducing a new security recruit, a young veteran whose daughter had just received a Brooks scholarship. Elena shook his hand. "You're part of something that protects more than buildings," she said. "You protect dignity. At table 7, the same one where the banker once sat frozen, now sat families, friends, strangers, all laughing, all equal." The soft music floated through the room again, the same playlist she'd chosen years ago, but now it sounded different. Not as background, but as harmony. On her desk upstairs, the platinum key fob rested inside a glass case. No longer a symbol of ownership, but of transformation. Beneath it, a small engraved plaque read, "True power doesn't dominate. It restores." That night, before leaving, Elena walked to the large front windows and watched as guests came and went. No tension, no judgment, just life. Messy, human, beautiful. She whispered to herself, almost like a prayer. We didn't just change a restaurant. We changed what it means to serve. And outside, the world kept turning, but a little kinder than before.